The footage for Session 8 was lost. That being said, it was also a much more laid-back episode that was meant to allow the party to slow down and breathe after the battle in Old Howler Cave. I will now give a recap of what happened during Session 8 and recount any relevant story developments. We began Session 8 with a scene that would have happened before the players went to bed the previous evening. Raymond Lavoie tells the players that if they have any mail they'd like delivered, he would see it done as a thank you for saving him. Evren wrote a letter, and Marko, with the help of Zana and Evren, wrote a letter as well. Raymond assured them that the courier system would get their letters delivered in a matter of days. The party awoke as usual in the Groggy Bee. After heading downstairs, they met up with Selena, who informed them that they would likely have a light day because the Peacekeeper was in bed recovering from a hangover and some illness. She explained that he left to go on his nightly walk and returned looking unwell and with cuts on his hands. She then told the players that she wanted to make a kind of medicinal brew to aid in Lionel's recovery and asked if Marko, Zana, and Evren would be willing to help. Since her father had done some apothecary work, she had picked up a few helpful recipes. Selena listed 3 things that she would need in addition to whatever else she could buy from Thesper, the shopkeep. First, witchwort, which often grows in caves or cellars. Next, barberry, which grows near water. And lastly, needles from a white pine tree. She then advised each party member to take along someone who was familiar with the town in order to speed the process up. Marko decided to take Philippa Lochran to help him find witchwort. Zana picked Eustace to help her look for barberry. Evren asked Auguste to help her find the pine needles. The following events were split up between groups A, B, and C, and all happened concurrently, even though I will be talking about the events as though they happened one at a time. Evren and Auguste set off to try and find pine trees. Auguste mentioned that this could be tricky because of the high winds that whip through Montrace. As they traveled off in the direction of the Bracewell homestead, Auguste asked about his journal and whether Evren and her friends had found anything useful in it. Evren told him that they had, and she thanked him for their use of it. Auguste, brimming with pride, told Evren that after spending years studying Montrace and the history of the Croyburn family, he dreams of publishing his findings and becoming an author. Evren then showed Auguste her botany field journal, and they bonded over dreams of having their work realized. After traveling a ways out of town, both Evren and Auguste rolled perception. Auguste spotted a clump of pines off in the distance. Once they arrived, Auguste instructed Evren to pluck a cluster of the needles and count them. Evren reported only 3. Auguste shook his head and told her that it was a red pine tree and that they'd have to keep looking. Using his fingers, Auguste explained that white pines have 5 needles to a cluster, 1 for each letter in the word white. After heading south toward the Lochran Mill, Auguste and Evren cut through a field via a small path. Finally, they arrived at a smaller pine that had blown over a few days prior during the party's investigation of the sheep that were stolen from Philippa Lochran. After determining that it was in fact a white pine, it took some time for the 2 of them to pick through the dead needles and find viable ones. After they had the needles, they headed back to the Groggy Bee. Zana and Eustace were instructed to look near water for the barberry plant. Eustace knew that there were some ponds closer to the mountains, but he also pointed out that he was confident that there was water on the property of the Cromwell family. This would mean talking to Dahlia Cromwell, the daughter of the recently deceased Caraman Cromwell. Eustace warned Zana that Caraman and Lionel didn't get along. Evidently, despite the Peacekeeper's best efforts to ingratiate himself to the town, Caraman distrusted him. As the 2 of them headed off to the south of the burial mounds, Zana and Eustace chatted. Eustace talked about his excitement leading up to his upcoming performance at the Karnak Carnival, still believing that the Gnome cannonball meant that he was going to lift a cannonball. As they approached the Cromwell homestead, both of them saw a small body of water out behind the house. After arriving at Dahlia's door, Zana knocked and they waited. Soon, the door was answered by Dahlia Cromwell, who asked their business. Zana explained that they needed barberry to help a friend, being careful not to divulge that the barberry was to help the Peacekeeper. Dahlia chatted with Zana and Eustace, explaining that her father was a good man who many wrote off as crazy because of his supposed irrational hatred of Lionel. She explained that there was something about the Peacekeeper's face that set her father off. Dahlia agreed to let Zana and Eustace look for the plant, telling them that they could take as much as they could find. As Eustace and Zana left the house, Dahlia asked them what the town was saying about her keeping her distance after the day of the funeral. Zana and Eustace told her that people were wondering about how she was doing. Dahlia then determined that she'd make an appearance. Checking the edge of the water, Eustace and Zana rolled high enough perception to spot a stalk of barberry. Using their combined strength rolls, they pulled it up by the roots, even though their hands got pretty cut up and they were bleeding. After they had the plant, they headed back to the Groggy Bee. Marko began his search for witchwort by asking Philippa if she had a cellar. She explained that not only did she not have a cellar, but the only places in which it grows must be unkempt, and that no local would risk witchwort getting into their food stores because of its sleep-inducing properties. Marko realized that there was only one place he could think of, which was down in the wool drop beneath Croyburn Manor. Philippa was ecstatic because she'd always wanted to go inside, but not by herself, and since Marko had braved the mansion before, she felt confident. As they walked, she talked about how excited she was at the prospect of receiving a mail response from her brother who was off at school in Evren, after Marko, Zana, and Evren had repaired their family mill. Entering Croyburn again, Marko took every precaution possible. He led the way to the fireplace and led Philippa down into the passageway. Once the two of them arrived in the wool drop, they spread out across the room. Philippa explained that it was likely to grow in one of the corners of the chamber. After a perception roll, both of them found some witchwort growing on the wall. Very carefully, Marko scraped some of the fungus off and made sure not to touch it with his bare hands. As Marko and Philippa started heading through the passage that leads to the outside, Philippa cried out in shock. She shone her torch to reveal the bloodstains of Haskin's body. Right before they left the room, Philippa drew attention to another bloodstain across from where Haskin's body was found. Marko was confused, but made a mental note. Then they headed through the twisting path, out the rusty gate, and between the two large boulders to the hillside. Then they went back to the Groggy Bee. After everyone was back together at the inn, Selena came in, followed by Thesper. The two of them began making preparations and mixing ingredients. Selena started giving out orders, as Marko, Zana, and Evren helped her make the brew. Using her control flame ability, Evren helped revive the fire in the kitchen to help boil the pine needles. After everything was mixed together, Selena asked the party to take it up to Lionel, who was in his room. The party then took the concoction upstairs and knocked on the Peacekeeper's door. He told them to enter and shut the door behind them. Upon entering his room, the party saw documents strewn about and a very sick-looking Lionel in bed. They gave him the drink, making sure he knew it was Selena's suggestion. Lionel took it gladly and drank some before talking to the party. He explained that what he was going to tell them could not leave the room. He told them that the previous night, he went out to think, and as he left the inn, he stumbled across 3 complete sheep skeletons lying on the cobblestones. Thinking quickly, he elected to remove every last bone and dispose of them to avoid mass panic. In the process, he injured his hands and got caught out in the rain. He then got drunk and stumbled back to the Groggy Bee. Lionel explains that he is convinced that whoever is sending him the notes is the same person who left the sheep skeletons. Since the Karnak Carnival will be the following day, he puts forward the idea of the party going to the carnival to make note of who is in attendance, while he stakes out the surrounding farms. Marko, Zana, and Evren agree to the idea and head back downstairs since Selena's brew was taking effect and Lionel was getting sleepy. After spending time downstairs with the evening regulars that were coming in, Dahlia Cromwell entered and thanked Zana and Eustace for coming to see her. She then made a point of saying that she hadn't been to town since the funeral. After a while, Thesper approached the party and asked them who Victor had seen them talking to in the graveyard a few days ago, if Dahlia hadn't been back out to the gravesite since her father's burial. He had assumed that it was Dahlia, because the person was wearing a veil. Marko, Evren, and Zana realized that they too assumed that the person at Karaman's grave was Dahlia, though the person never spoke. After the evening passed, Dahlia asked the party if they would escort her to her father's gravesite so she could see all the flowers. The party obliged and made sure she got to the gravesite, then back home. On their way, the group started talking about the carnival. Dahlia mentioned that she hadn't been in a very long time. Zana, Evren, and Marko encouraged her to go along with them. Dahlia gladly accepted. After saying goodbye for the evening, the party headed back to the Groggy Bee, and then to sleep. Session 8 ended with this epilogue. Despite what you've learned, you still feel a sense of unease. As you roll over in your bed, you wish silently that you could be back with your family and friends. Meanwhile, in a pasture by a brook, a wooden gate swings forward and back, forward and back. A shepherd raises his lantern in the direction of the rhythmic noise.